This is Aliska van Voort in the studio from the Frontline, and tonight we are dealing with the influence of eschatology in missions. And Dr. Hammond is going to help us to clear up the subject. So first, Dr. Hammond, what is eschatology?
Eschatology might be a big word, but it refers to something really important, study of the end times. So eschatology, we mean our view of the future. In theology, it's our doctrine of the future. And so if you've got an optimistic, positive eschatology, it might inspire you to great achievements. If you've got a very pessimistic, or some people call it pessimillennialism, where you think, everything's only going to get worse and worse and worse, that obviously affects one too. So your eschatology is your view of the end times. Now, all Christians believe that Jesus is going to return bodily to this earth. All Christians of every persuasion believes the day of judgment is coming, when the Lord will judge all people. He will reward his people, the faithful. He will punish those who have refused his way of salvation on earth. We believe in heaven. We believe in hell. So all those are matters of eschatology. So actually, even if you didn't know the word before, you all have an eschatology. You believe in the Lord's return. You believe in his day of judgment. You believe in heaven and hell. You believe in rewards, punishments. So that's part of eschatology. But there's more to it than that. When does the Lord return? Does he return before the Great Commission is fulfilled? After the Great Commission is fulfilled? Do we believe that the next thing that's going to happen is the beast, the Antichrist, the 666, is going to take over the whole world, behead Christians, destroy everything, and the whole world's going to start rolling up like a scroll and burning up, and the stars are going to fall? That's some people's view of the end times. Other people are believing, no, but we're going to see the fulfillment of the Great Commission. Every race, nation, tribe evangelized, people from every tribe, language, race, and tribe represented in heaven, and the Lord will return once the Great Commission is fulfilled on earth. So these are different views of eschatology. You could divide them up into post-millennial, which means the Lord's going to return after the Great Commission is fulfilled. Pre-millennial, which means that the millennium is going to come only after the 666, the beast, the Antichrist, 7 years tribulation. Then there'll be the millennium, and after that, the Lord will actually have the day of judgment. So some people have got what's called a premillennial view. Others have got a amillennial view. That's all just symbolic. And then there's the postmillennial view, which is the most optimistic view of it all, which is that the Lord will return when the Great Commission is fulfilled, when the earth is as full of the glory of the knowledge of the Lord, the seas are full of water. So, in a word, eschatology is last days, end times, future.
Okay, that's very enlightening. Thank you, Dr. Hammond. And so, where in the Bible do you get like verses about the Lord coming again? What would be about like the until every tribe is reached, those kind of verses? Where can you read about that?
Well, in each of the Gospels, the Lord Jesus tells us in his discourse on the end times. You get in Luke, you get in Matthew, specifically many chapters speaking about the end times and the day of judgment. And when the Lord returns, I'll say to those on his left and those on his right. Well, interesting how those on his left are always the goats and the damned and the wicked, and those on his right are the blessed and the sheep, and welcome, enter into the joy of our Lord. So well done, good and faithful servant. So you get at the ends of the Gospels quite a bit of eschatology. Book of Daniel has a lot, and the book of Revelation, of course, has the most.
It's full of it, yeah.
And then there's also other end times prophecies woven into Isaiah a lot, and Zephaniah and Habakkuk, and many of the minor prophets would have aspects of the end times, but it gets the clearest in Daniel, Isaiah, Matthew's Gospel, Luke's Gospel, and the book of Revelation.
Okay, well, thank you. So what is the influence of eschatology on missions?
Well, I actually did my doctorate on this very subject, what inspired the greatest century of missionary advance. And it became very clear to me that it was post-millennialism. It was an extremely optimistic view of the end times that inspired the greatest century of missions, the 19th century. And this, in fact, was a major change in my life, because when I was converted, I was immediately confronted with premill, pre-trib, dispensational, end times, rapture fever, the Lord's coming any moment. We were reading books like Jesus is alive, Satan is alive and well on planet Earth. There's a new world coming. And then there were films like like a thief in the night that we're showing at massive evangelistic rallies, and Distant Thunder, which is all end times. One will be taken, another left behind, and they were having Larry Norman and others singing, I wish we had all been ready. And we were all, in the 70s when I was converted, very, very obsessed with we're in the last days, we're the terminal generation. That was the title of the book too. And so everything is coming to an end. And so as a new Christian, for my first 5 years as a Christian, I never thought of my children or grandchildren. I never thought there'd be time. I'd never have time to get married. We were the terminal generation. The Lord's coming back in our generation. And Jerusalem being liberated, Israel's been established in the Middle East. This is the key. This is the prophetic clock. There's this gap theory. And, within one generation, we assumed, because of our understanding of Israel being started again in 1948, that the Lord will return. So 1970s, this is it. We're getting to the end of it. And by the end of 78, without a shadow of a doubt, because, that's just 30 years after Jerusalem, Israel, 1948. And we were absolutely convinced we were living in the last days. And so, as a result, I didn't keep pictures of almost anything in my time in the army. What for? I didn't keep a library. I didn't keep anything. Just about all my books are loaned out. All my first generation of books, I don't know where they are, my notes and so on, they're just given all over the place. Because I wasn't thinking of my children. What children? There wouldn't be any children.
You didn't expect. Were you surprised? No view for the future.
Well, yes. Because for example, I went into the army doing my national service, not expecting to come out because the rapture had come first. I had no plans for the future. I couldn't think of Bible college. Why would you go to Bible college? The Lord will come before you can graduate. So my short-term view was so clear. I've got gaps in my teeth because I wouldn't get teeth fixed. I'd just have it pulled out. I remember asking dentists in the army and in the field, I just pulled out. So there's gaps in the Schofield Bible. They put a gap between Genesis 1 verse 1, Genesis 1 verse 2, because they wanted to accommodate evolution. The first notes and the first study Bible with notes, the Schofield Bible, specifically was written to make provision for evolution. That between, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There's millions of years, maybe billions, and Genesis 1 verse 2, when he created the heavens and the earth. And they also put a huge gap in Daniel's 70th week, between the 69th and the 70th week, 2,000 years and counting. And so they had those gaps. Well, I've got my premolar gaps in my teeth as well, because I didn't bother to have teeth fixed. I just thought it was cheap and easier to have them pulled out. And so it was, to me, a key time was 1982. The planets were lining up, and so from 1981 they were predicting that in 1982 the planets will line up and this will cause floods and earthquakes and all sorts of things. And this is all the signs of Matthew 24 and the Lord's coming back and in this generation and terminal generation. And I was frantically busy doing as much missions as I could, knowing that the Lord's coming again.
You want to reach everyone.
But there was no long-term planning. And then when the planets didn't line up in 1982 and we moved to 1983, I was shattered. I felt I've been like the boy crying wolf. Actually a false prophet, because I've been contributing to telling people all about you've got to come to Jesus because he's coming soon, end of this year sort of thing, date setting virtually, because there's all these things. In fact, later on, it wasn't just Hal Lindsey and Dave Hunt, and there was a whole lot of others. One person brought out a book in 1987, 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1988. It was all connected with Israel, 40 years, 1948 and so on, to 1988. And then next year he brought out 89 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming in 1989.
Wow.
And with the proceeds that he built a yacht which he sailed around the world with. Schofield, who wrote the Schofield Bible and popularized the pre-mill, pre-trib dispensation thing, he went through 4 wives and divorces. I suppose when he thought it wasn't till death do us part, but till the rapture do us part. So he wasn't maybe thinking long term. And that was Schofield, who had huge funding from non-Christians to produce this Schofield Bible. So this brings it to me. I reached the stage where I suddenly realized I'm part of a deception here. I'm telling people the Lord's coming soon. I've been doing this for 5 years now. We've hit 1982. no plans lining up, no apocalypse, no rapture.
No, it changed everything you thought.
I just had to stop for a moment. And up till then, my missionary work had been distributing Gospels and we don't want people thinking about the Old Testament. There's not enough time even to read it. Let's just get them into the New Testament. So the first missions of Frontline were New Testaments being distributed in the field. And then I heard, in fact, it was quite extraordinary. Somebody spoke about the Puritan Hope. And I wondered, what is the Puritan Hope and what's the point about all this? Mm-hmm. And I got this book by Ian Murray, The Puritan Hope, and it gripped me because in it revealed that the Puritans, who were serious Reformed Christians who in the 16th century, 1600s, from the 16th century into the 17th century, they had strong Calvinistic doctrine and they had very strong devotion. So they had heart and head, wonderful balance, quite uniquely. And they were expecting the earth to be as full of the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the seas are full of water. And there were all these great prophecies about the Great Commission being fulfilled. And the Puritan Hope, or the post-millennial eschatology of victory, had inspired the missionaries of the 19th century missionary movement, like David Livingstone, best friend Africa ever had, William Carey, the father of modern missions. And I thought, well, I have no idea what post-millennialism is, but if Carey and Livingstone thought of this, then I'd better study it. Yeah. And I also read there were Calvinists, thought, what's that? But I'd have to study these things to discover. Yeah. So 1982 into 83 marked a tremendous transition for me also because I was studying at Baptist Theological College. And in fact, I wouldn't have even gone to college but that my eschatology of defeat and retreat, of escape and rapture had been shattered. Yeah. And at this point, my pastor said to me, look, obviously you're in missions for life. So you must go to college. I didn't want to, but I believed I had to obey my pastor. And when I went there, I discovered, boy, there's a lot of things I didn't know about. And this was very helpful. And as I studied David Livingstone and William Carey, I could see what they achieved was directly caused by what they believed about the end times. And it's because they believed that the Lord expected his people to fulfill the Great Commission before he returned. They went out to seek first God's kingdom, to make disciples of all nations, to teach obedience to all peoples, and they were successful. Now contrast that with the 20th century, where things have gotten pretty bad. And to what extent is this a self-fulfilling prophecy that people are saying things are going to get worse and worse? And you shouldn't be involved in politics. And you shouldn't talk about politics and religion. That's too controversial. And these people who thought, let's stay out of politics. And then things get worse and worse. And they say, you see, I told you things are going to get worse and worse. But to what extent is that a self-fulfilling prophecy? The Christians of the 19th century, the 1800s, believed that God expected his people to fulfill the Great Commission on earth before he returned. And they made spectacular achievements. They won cannibals to Christ. They won whole nations to Christ, whole tribes to Christ, all over the world. In the 20th century, we thought things are going to get worse and worse, and they did. You should stay out of politics, and it got even more corrupt. And then babies could be killed legally, and abortion, pornography, gambling, prostitution could be legalized. Perversion, not just made legal, but compulsory for primary schools. So, to a large extent, the 20th century has been the worst century of persecution. More Christians have died in the 20th century from persecution than all other centuries combined. So the 20th century has been the worst century for the church.
This makes me think of, I think, William Wilberforce, who was into politics. He was a politician, and when he became converted, he thought he had to leave that. And then his counselor said, no, maybe God has you there with a reason. And I think also, as you often say, about 89% of the Bible is about politics.
Yeah, well, a good 80% is politics. It's so true. So we are needed. How can we say that the Bible has nothing to do about politics or economics or social or justice issues, when most of it does? Only a minority of the Bible deals with personal, spiritual things, and yet you've got a lot of Christians thinking we shouldn't be involved in the social, educational, economic, arts and sciences, and yet the Bible encourages that and has inspired the greatest arts and sciences through history, including founding hospitals, schools, universities,
Yeah, and that's very long-term thinking and reaching other Christians and building up to reach more in even the next generations as well.
Yes, so just think of the cathedrals. We were horrified earlier this year to see the burning of the Notre Dame Cathedral. Now, just look at the cathedrals. Cathedrals were built over many generations. It took at least 3 generations, at least 100 years to build the average cathedral. These people built to last. There are cathedrals around here. Many of them were built around the 10th century. So many of our greatest cathedrals, like Westminster Abbey and so on, are about 1,000 years old.
Yeah.
Now, those people built for the future. They were thinking of their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren's generation.
Yeah, they wouldn't see the finished product,
No.
but their grandchild would.
And now today, we've got this attitude of, we'll just rent a prefab somewhere. It's, what does this tell you about our views? You go into the mission field and you see some magnificent mission stations and churches built by people who obviously were planning for the future. And today, what do we see? We see, in many cases, Christians that hand over the schools, the theological seminaries, and the universities over to pagans who hate Christ. And it's as though it doesn't really matter. In fact, I've spoken to Christians who said, what about your children's generation and your grandchildren's generation? Says, well, I don't expect to have any grandchildren.
Sure.
And I don't care if my children get married or not or have any children. And that mentality comes from the rapture fever, pre-mold, pre-trib, dispensational. This is a disposable world, throwaway world.
Saying it's all going to not last anyway.
Yeah, we're the last generation anyway. So we don't need to think about other generations.
Yeah, and that's not what God calls us to in the Great Commission.
No, not at all. So this is the thing. The Great Commission is to make disciples of all nations and teach obedience to everything the Lord has commanded. And for this reason, we as Christians cannot think short-term. We have to think long-term. I can't only think, and this is the difference. In the first 5 years as a Christian, I was an evangelomaniac. I did a lot of gospel literature distribution. I did a lot of witnessing and preaching. And I, by God's grace, achieved something. But once I started to think in a post-millennial way, having a reformed understanding of doctrine and an eschatology victory, I started planning long-term, not just tracks, but books. Not just a rally, but a course and a conference. Not just that, not just the New Testament, but the whole Bible. And now I'm thinking of planning missionaries to take over from me. And of course got married, 4 children, 2 grandchildren now, so far. And it's now, I'm thinking of my grandchildren's generation, and that's when we got actually a mission base, because before that we were just totally itinerant. I'd hitchhike or go on my motorbike around the place, and we did some good. But now, 4-wheel drive buckies, trailers, taking tons to distribute, building up libraries in the places, planning long-term, investing in permanent mission bases in the countries and the Bible colleges and the libraries. So my outlook's been liberated a lot from being freed from the short term. I mean, you just think what blinkers it puts on you when you can't think beyond a few months ahead. And I don't even know if I thought that far ahead. I was very much, today and this week maybe. But the moment I got the eschatology victory, I got more interested in the past. I studied history and I was planning more long term. And for example, I remember people going berserk over just Y2K, year 2000. The amount of people thought this is the end of the world. And these were scientists telling us, some of the top scientists, IBM and so on, telling us that in the year 2000, all the planes are going to fall out of the sky, cars are going to stop, no more electricity, no more plumbing, because we'll roll over to 0, and because the computers had been set just on 76 and 80 this and 90 this, when it goes from 99 to 0, everything will shut down. And this wasn't just some lunatics. This is some of the top scientists in the world were predicting catastrophic disaster. And of course, the end times we went berserk. They got a real infusion, and there was a lot of people who were absolutely panicking. Well, we, at that stage, had such confidence. I was planning our Biblical Worldview Summit and Great Commission courses on the first week of 2000. We had plans. We were going all the way through. We had long-term plans. And while other missions stalled, paused, were paralyzed like rabbits on the highway in the headlights at night, we didn't miss a beat. And we actually had plans that carried us through, because we were planning still for the next 10, 20 years. We didn't get a blimp there. I saw other ministries in this country coming to a standstill in 1994 as we're heading into the ANC Mandela elections. We had plans, we kept moving. We're one ministry that did not slow down. We accelerated through May 94. And it's because of my eschatology of victory that all my children, all four of my children, 2 grandchildren, are living in Cape Town. Most South Africans have their children all over the world. When I go to Australia, people there have been saying, are you coming here to visit your children? I said, no, my children are all back in Cape Town. In fact, they live in our home, all of them. And how do you do that? And, well, we're Christians, we're in the ministry, and things are so bad in South Africa. But bad times are good for spiritual work. Our biggest problem is apathy. And when things are bad, people are more open to spiritual truth. So this isn't the time to slow down. This is the time for us to accelerate.
Yeah, we have more opportunities than ever. The worse it goes, the more need there is to fill. So I was wondering, what do the people make of the Lord will come like a thief in the night when they believe or when they teach?
Yes. Well, of course, many of them are thinking in terms of the rapture, but of course the word rapture doesn't actually appear in the Bible. What we get in the Bible is the talking that we've got to be ready. Now, whether the Lord comes or calls is one way that you can think. So what's the difference between you dying in a car accident or a terrorist attack or any other kind of accident or the rapture occurring? In both cases, you've got to face the Lord.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
I've got to live every day to make it count. So that if the Lord comes or calls, he finds me busy about his work, productive. That I'm not one of these slothful servants who's sleeping or didn't have any oil in my lamp, the unprepared virgins. You had 5 who were planning for a long wait and had lots of oil, and the others ran out of oil because they didn't expect the master to come at that stage. In fact, he delayed, so they ran out of oil. They weren't ready. They weren't prepared long term. So in the Bible, you think of the tremendous prophecies about the Great Commission being fulfilled, that every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Just think of these great hymns like Jesus Shall Reign Wherever the Sun Doth His Successive Journeys Run, by Isaac Watts, written 300 years ago, based on Psalm 72, and he's speaking about the kings will bow down. In fact, when whole nations and tribes were converted to Christ in the Pacific, cannibals in many cases, they would often sing Jesus Shall Reign, Isaac Watts' hymn, as they adopted a Christian constitution and as they were taking their first communion. Christ shall have dominion. From Greenland's icy mountains, these are post-millennial hymns. Zion's king shall reign victorious. So there's so many. You could just see the hymns of the 19th century were some of the greatest hymns in history. They inspired the greatest missionary achievements. This is what inspired William Carey to write as an inquiry into the obligation of Christians to use means for the conversion of the heathen, and launching the particular Baptist Calvinist Society for the Propagation of the Gospel amongst the heathen, the first prototype denominational mission. And he preached this sermon: expect great things from God, attempt great things for God. God is great, honor him with great faith. And this is what inspired these missionaries like David Livingstone to walk across the continent of Africa in the slave trade, heal bodies, preach the gospel, teach people, work on getting Bible translations done, reduce languages to alphabets, illiterate languages, working out grammars. And these, you think if you are believing the world's coming to an end in 5 years or less, would you go to the study and hard work to translate a language into get the Bible translated into a language that isn't even written down? It's a minimum 15 years.
Yeah, you
it might take 25 years. If you think you've only got 5 years, why would you start a 25-year plan? And so that's why people involved in Bible translation have a long-term vision. Somebody was saying, for example, I just heard this on Sunday from someone who heard the Bible studies busy on getting 2 Khoi and San languages translated for the Bible, and he discovered there's only 2,000 of them. And he said, why are you doing this for just 2,000 people? And the Bible translator said, so how many of your ancestors came to the Cape? And he said, I think about 300. And he said, and now how many are there?
Yeah, wow.
And so you're not just thinking for this generation, you're thinking for the multi-generations. That is a post-millennial vision.
thinking of, yes, so true. And there's also a difference between if you have thinking like rapture fever, thinking the end times is coming now, then you're going to focus on, I need to do all of this, this, and this today. So your days are going to be filled and productive, but it's not going to last in the end. When you say, I'm working for the next generation, it's also so important to use every second and use every minute, but it's going to multiply over generations because you think in that way.
Yes, I'm convinced I do more and achieve more because of my long-term vision now. Because while it's one thing to be a short-distance sprinter, it's another thing to be a long-distance marathon runner and a mountain marathon runner. And to have this idea, we're in here for the long haul. Now, I've been now a Christian for 42 years, and I've been in missions for 38 years. And I've never stopped. I haven't stalled by God's grace. I haven't gotten diverted. I've stayed focused for 38 years on missions. And what's kept me on there? Well, actually, it's been this vision of victory, ultimately. Psalm 22, all the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before you. For the kingdom is the Lord's, and he rules over the nations. And in fact, I've done studies on the eschatology victory in the Psalms, which is massive, and in Daniel, which is colossal, and in Revelation, which is huge. The kingdoms of the world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. You just need to go to Handel's Messiah presentation, which is all scripture. And here, for 3 hours, they're pounding out these King of Kings, Lord of Lords. And this is the vision. The fact is, we need to repent for thinking so little of God. Many of us, we've always got our thoughts of God are inadequate. He is greater. His plan is greater. His plans are greater. And so we should honor God with great faith, great obedience, great enterprise. Why are we aiming so low? Why are we happy to let the pagans hijack the universities? The very term university, it comes from uni veritas, one truth. Pagans don't even believe in truth, let alone one truth. And they don't believe it can be known. So why are they running the universities? Uni veritas, one truth, that testifies to the Christian origins of universities. Universities were all uniformly, originally Christian. Oxford, Cambridge, and so on, all founded by missionaries with missionary purpose. And so today, we should take back the universities. I mean, the pagans can go down the road and open up a polyversity, a diversity, an aversity.
A postmodern university.
But a university should be Christian by definition. And yet many Christians somehow think, you can't mix Christianity with science. Listen, Christianity invented science. Or this idea that you can't mix Christianity with education. Education must be neutral. Education cannot be neutral. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Everything has consequences. There's no neutral thoughts in the world. And so education prescribes a worldview and actions and moral, ethical standards. And therefore, all education is inherently religious. You can choose a Muslim education, a Roman Catholic education, a Buddhist or a secular humanist education, a communist education, Protestant Christian education, but you can't choose a neutral education. Every form of education is inherently religious. So why are Christians sending their children to the Philistines, to the heathen, to brainwash them and indoctrinate them? It's because they don't actually understand the long-term vision of the Great Commission and of the vision of victory. Or they would be saying, I'm going to home educate my kids. I'm only going to send them where the Bible reigns paramount. I'm not going to send my children to be indoctrinated by a bunch of heathen. And why are my taxes going to fund this? And so you'd get involved in trying to change things because you've got a biblical worldview. But sadly, many Christians today miss this and think what we have around us today is normal. This is not normal. This is a world in rebellion to God.
Yeah, that's so true. And so how do you see this generation or century we're now in, after the 19th and 20th century? How do you think will we, the next generation, be?
Well, this is why I think it's important for us to ask, what do I believe? Why do I believe it? What's the scriptural evidence? And to read the different materials, that is very helpful. So I was a guest, I was a participant in the Cape Town 2010, or Lausanne 3, the largest missions conference in the history of the world, which happened in Cape Town. Interesting, in 2010, October 2010. Never had to travel such a short distance to a missions conference. I've been to missions conference all over the world, and this was like 10 minutes drive down the road. Absolutely
amazing. It was
amazing.
international.
Incredible. 4,200 people came together. It should have been 4,500 from 197 countries. Should have been 198 countries. But Red China stopped all 300 of their delegates from leaving the country. They arrested them all or took away their passports. Not one was able to leave the country. And so we had representatives from 197 countries, but not China.
From China.
And in fact, China's blocked their people from the first Lausanne Congress, the second one in the Philippines, and this one too. They even launched cyber war, the worst cyber war the world has ever seen. They unleashed millions of hostile hits, which shut down the entire communication system of Cape Town International Conference Center, which took a while for people to work out what was happening and why. It was meant to be live streamed to another 150,000 people in another 50-odd countries around the world at over 100 venues. And that wasn't possible because China showed the world what cyber war was like, even greater than what America launched on Iraq during the Iraq Gulf War. So interesting that Red China, Communist China, thought that a missions conference in Cape Town was worth using their cyber war technologies, which of course would have revealed what their tactics and abilities were, which why would they have thought this was worthwhile? So obviously communist atheist China recognized the importance of missions. Interesting that. Well, anyway, as a participant at this World Missions Conference in Cape Town 2010, I couldn't help but notice, because I like history, the first World Missions Conference was 1910 in Edinburgh. And in fact, the man who recommended the first World Missions Conference was William Carey 200 years before. He had recommended a World Missions Conference in 1810 in Cape Town. Now, it didn't fly. No one seemed interested. He was a man ahead of his time. But talk about ahead of his time. It was 100 years later that the first World Missions Conference was held in Edinburgh. It was 200 years later it was held in Cape Town. So, how about that for foresight and vision? That's how forward-thinking William Carey was. Yeah. So I then did some research on Edinburgh in 1910. And what did I discover? Well, in 1910, the consensus of the delegates from around the world was the Great Commission will be fulfilled by 1960. Within the next 50 years, we will see every nation thoroughly evangelized and discipled and the extinction of all false religions. There will be no more Roman Catholicism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, gone.
If they go on the way they were going on.
And that wasn't unrealistic. If present trends had continued, the greatest century of missions, the 19th century, which was phenomenal church growth. And remember, in 1910, Christians ruled the world. In 1910, these superpowers were all Protestant. Germany, America, Britain, great economic powers like Netherlands, all Protestant. Scandinavia, Protestant. And so growing countries like South Africa, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, all Protestant. Protestants ruled the world, with the exception of China, which was very weak, the Muslim Middle East, which was decaying, and the Ottoman Empire was crumbling, about to collapse and divide up. The only significant non-Christian country that was strong in 1910 was Japan. And they were at that moment opening up to the gospel. But still, in fact, they were copying America and Britain a lot in their navy and their economy. So with the exception of Japan, Ottoman Empire, and China, the world was ruled by Christians. Either Protestants, in the case of Germany and Britain and America, or Orthodox in the case of Russia, or Catholic in the case of France and Spain and so on, Portugal and Austria. So to think that we deteriorated so much since 1910 to 2010, I looked at it and honestly had to say, while we'd increased in numbers, we'd decreased in influence and quality. And while the 20th century has seen more missionaries, it's seen a lower quality of impact for the gospel. For example, in 1910, people were celebrating the end of slavery, the end of human trafficking. There was no more widow burning, no more of so many evils, which have all come back in the last century. As Christianity's retreated, we have seen heathenism advance to the point where there's not even a country in the world today that can be called truly, consistently Christian. We've got some countries that may think they're Christian, but they're not consistently so. Not in terms of biblical principles. In terms of quality, we've seen Christendom, Europe, bludgeon itself to death in two fratricidal civil wars, They wiped out one another by the millions. We've seen Europe shrink in its influence and retreat from all over the world. And we've seen secular humanist powers like the Soviet Union, Red China, and sadly the United States, which is less Christian and more secular humanist these days, rise to actually make the world a worse place in terms of morals, safety. People are not... you could travel in 1910 from Cape Town to Cairo with a car, not even a four-wheel drive, without a passport, without a roadblock. I mean, imagine.
Wow, that's freedom.
And 1950s, you could go very easily across Africa without a car, without a weapon, without a passport, without a fear, without a worry. And today, you can have a four-wheel drive vehicle and you can't even go as fast as a bicycle could go on some roads in Sudan, because the bicycles could go better on the roads faster. I've tracked it in the 1920s and 30s than a four-wheel drive can go now because of the deterioration of the roads and the breakdown of infrastructure, blowing up of bridges and so many other things that have happened. So as a missionary to over 38 countries across the world, I've traveled far and wide in all of Africa as far as Sudan and Nigeria and the Congo. And in each case, I've seen the people living worse lives, lower life expectancies, less safe today than they were back 60, 70 years ago. And so what has happened? And this has led me to do the study to discover that obviously there are many factors. But one major factor is eschatology. In the 19th century, people had a strong reformed view of not only now and of the church and our duties, but also of the future. They expected to be able to change the world. They went out and by the power of God's Spirit, they did. In the 20th century, the 1900s, people have expected things to get worse and worse, and it has. And they said we shouldn't get involved in politics, and it gets worse. And so, to a large extent, you can see some things are self-fulfilling prophecy. Your eschatology determines your vision and your activities.
Yeah, there's even a new song by one of the pop singers, Harry Styles, that says, "Just stop your crying, it's the sign of the times," and saying that the bombs and the shooting and all of that, it's basically normal and we should expect that and just stop crying. And that's very defeatist. I think that's, as you say, the whole problem that's going on is that we agree with that and go along with it instead of working against it and standing strong in Christianity and attempt great things for God.
Without a vision, a people perish. And so you just think of this tremendous vision of people like William Carey. And William Carey made comments like this. Now, you know, he worked for 7 years in the field in India before he experienced his first convert.
Yes.
Imagine working for 7 years. You could be quite depressed. But he said, when this first man, Christian Powell, was converted and baptized, he said, the divine grace which saved one Indian's heart, which changed one Indian's heart, can obviously change 100,000.
That's so true.
And also the first missionary to the Chinese, Robert Morrison, the first Protestant missionary, when he worked for 7 years before seeing his first convert, he said maybe the first fruits of millions who will be saved. And at that time, people thought Chinese are unreachable, you know. And yet today we know there's over 120 million Chinese Christians in China. There's more Bible-believing, born-again Christians in China than there are in the whole of North America, just for example. Number, not percentage. But it's something that people couldn't have seen then, but some did. Some missionaries like Adoniram Judson, William Carey, Robert Morrison, they looked to the future. They were convinced that we are just the watchmen working in the night. We are laying the seeds, but the dawn will come. And the day will come when there will be millions of Christians here. And David Livingstone writes of this. As he's traveling across Africa, he got very few converts in his lifetime. But he was convinced that there would be one day millions of Christians in what today is Zambia.
And he opened many doors. He opened so many doors for us. And also, Robert Morrison, when he was on the ship traveling to China, I think someone asked him, "Do you really expect to change those Chinese people's hearts?" He said, "No, but I expect God can, or God will."
Exactly.
And that's the difference, thinking, I must do it right here, right now, and or I can't really do it, but saying God can do it, and He can do it through our generations, trusting in God and being guided by the Holy Spirit, I think.
Definitely. So if the gospel doesn't change your life and change the lives of those around you, then it's not the biblical gospel. The gospel of Jesus Christ is life-changing, history-making, nation-transforming. This is what the Bible says. There's so many prophecies. When we look at the prophecies, we should just sit back in shock at how we've accepted a brainwashing of us, which has made us in many cases ineffective, and expecting to be sidelined, and expecting our children to turn out as secular humanist pagans. No, this is not the Christian way. The Christian way is to study the Word of God, be inspired by the biblical vision of victory, and get out and seek first God's kingdom, making disciples of all nations. So this effectively is the eschatology of victory, which inspired the greatest century of missions. And if we want the 21st century to be as blessed, and I pray even more blessed, we can't follow the 20th century's bad examples. We need to go back to the 19th century's more biblical, more honoring to God vision of victory to win the whole world for Christ.
So you would say that is then to be post-millennial in what we think and do, and to be educating the next generation, and to be planning ahead for them.
Yes, having a multi-generational vision like the people who built the cathedrals. So as I've been studying on this, the books that I found really helpful to me was The Puritan Hope by Ian Murray, which was published by Banner of Truth. Last Day's Madness by Gary DeMar, very helpful in exposing the foolishness of many of these predictions, which is madness, actually. Last Day's Madness. Very helpful. David Chilton did some very helpful books, such as On the Great Tribulation, showing how the first century was the Great Tribulation before the destruction of Jerusalem. He also wrote the books on the beast, and he did a commentary on Revelation called Days of Vengeance, showing how Revelation is best understood in the historicist position, that a lot of it's been fulfilled already. Of course, some still ahead. But it was showing the main emphasis in Revelation is the victory of Christ over all his enemies. And I've also studied a range of books on post-millennialism and by Marcellus Kick and the Vision of Victory. There's some brilliant books out there. And it led me to produce this Greatest Century of Missions book, which has gone through 3 printings, over 20,000 printed so far already, which is quite surprising. And in it, I draw from a wide range of some of the greatest missionaries of all time. And basically, the Greatest Century of Missions is a book that's got over 220 pages and over 200 pictures and maps and so on. And I've got the biographies of 19 missionaries, some of the greatest missionaries of the 19th century, and also what inspired them, what challenged them. So it's got the doctrine, it's got the eschatology, it's got timelines, visions. But basically, these biographies, it's just used as a textbook by many home educators and Christian schools and some colleges to introduce people to examples of excellence. But in every case, I found they were all inspired by the vision of victory.
While reading through the book, I realized, I think there was also someone who worked for 20 years even before having a convert. And
it sounds like Samuel Zwemmer.
Yes,
working in Saudi Arabia.
Yes, and then, like you said, Hudson Taylor and William Carey working for 7 years and so on. And it was just so inspiring to see how God gave them strength through what they went through and how God used them. And even when William Wilberforce was in Parliament, how he worked for abolishing slavery. And then at the end of David Livingstone's life, he didn't see the end of that. But after he died, it was abolished. And so many things that they worked for, even after they died, only happened what they were working for. But they knew what they were working for and focused on that.
Yes, now, connected to this, I started a Facebook page called Greatest Century of Missions. Also another one, Victorious Christians Change the World, where we often put what happened on this day in some people's links. And there's also even a Dr. David Livingstone Facebook page that we start, dr.David Livingstone. If you get to one at just David Livingstone, you see there's not much going on there for years. That's not our one. Ours is dr.Dr. David Livingstone. And that Facebook page, very active, lots of great pictures, links to videos, PowerPoints, slides, articles and audios. And we regularly give teachings on these things in a Great Commission course. So we've got much of this in audiovisual format, all the books from Christian Liberty Books. If you go onto our site, you'll also see details about the next Great Commission course, when we're trying to train people with a vision of victory to make an impact for today. So if anyone's interested, I'd recommend you go onto our Frontline-Mission.sa.org website. We've got quite a lot of Bible studies, history studies, visions on the individuals. You can also see how you can get the book Great Essential Missions through Christian Liberty Books. It's also available as an ebook too, I believe.
Yeah.
Not only that, but on social media you'll see the opportunities to link up. At our Reformation Society, I'll regularly deal with some great missionaries of the past, and then that we normally get a screen capture video, PowerPoints, audios, and that gets uploaded on the web. So if anyone's interested in studying more on this, and we will also have on the Christian Liberty Books a page on the eschatology, there'll be things like Last Days Madness and the Puritan Hope, which I think are brilliant introductions to. And for many people, they may be thinking, but what about this and what about that? Well, yes, if we've been given only one way of looking at the end times over the years, it'll take a while to answer all those questions, but the answers are there.
Yes.
You just need to work your way through the books and see. And it often opens one's eyes. All those passages in the Bible I was just reading over, and the Lord doesn't come back for a tear field with a few weeds. He comes back for a wheat field with a few tares.
Yeah.
There's so many things like that that just open up. Suddenly the parables make more sense and so on. When you look at this, which inspired the church for most of church history, the view of pessimillennialism, as you could call it, is actually relatively new. It only started in about the 1830s. And so most Christians are holding to something which most Christians in church history would not have recognized in terms of eschatology.
Wow. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Hammond. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else did as well. So we, as you said, you can go to our website, www.frontlinemissionssr.org.za, and there is more resources on where we can find the books, and also on the Great Commission course and BWS next year. And thank you so much, Dr. Hammond. Have a good evening.
Good night.